Good evening all, and welcome. Tonight, I have the pleasure of being joined by the incredibly talented We Shouldn't Be Here, as we share with you ample horrors for this windy night. So get comfortable, and let the darkness take control. Here is a bit of backstory. This happened a few years ago, while I was living with my older brother and younger sister. As much as I love my brother, he's made some pretty poor life choices with the women he's dated. This woman in particular was a very big brand of crazy. He started dating this woman Sandra, and initially was very happy with the relationship, and I was happy for them. For some reason though, Sandra hated me. I was always more of a silent observer. They moved in together whilst he was living with my sister. She started imposing weird rules. For example, if she didn't like a particular food, it was not allowed in the house, period. Okay, fine, whatever. It started getting weird when she became really jealous of my siblings' relationship. If they were to speak without her present, she believed they were talking about her. My sister would borrow his sweaters or clothing when she was hanging out around the house, and as a result, she became convinced that they were carrying on an incestuous relationship. My sister couldn't handle it anymore and moved back in with my mum. Eventually, of course, they broke up, and she moved out. My lease was ending, and he convinced me to move in the townhouse with him. I did, and my sister came back as well. At this point, they had a child together, and she was tormenting him, threatening to keep him away from his son, saying that she would call the police on him. Just constant phone calls, constant harassment, threatening him if he didn't comply with what she wanted. About 6 months into living there, I hadn't spoken to her in about 3 or 4 months. I went out with a mutual friend of ours, and while we were out, my sister and her friend were calling me, complaining that my brother was drunk and bothering them. They decided to leave for the night. Normally her leaving wouldn't have been an issue, but on this particular night, I pleaded with her to come home. I need to stress that this was completely out of character. She agreed, and we picked them up on our way home. I lectured my brother and went upstairs to bed. My sister was watching a movie and fell asleep in my room. Now, our house has a kind of open door policy. Friends were always over, and the door was rarely, if ever, locked day or night. It was never an issue, until this particular night. My sister and I were asleep, and out of nowhere, my bedroom light turns on, and Sandra is standing there with a knife that she'd brought from home. The next thing I know, my sister has thrown herself over me and is holding onto her arms, and my brother has her from behind. I know they talk about fight or flight, but I was neither. I just froze like a damn statue, terrified of making any sudden movements. I was sleeping under a duvet, and the only thing that I could think to do was to slowly curl my legs under my body and pull my blanket up. My sister is screaming at the top of her lungs, trying to reason with her. I just remember her telling my sister not to worry, that she wasn't there for her, and that she came to kill me. Essentially assuring her that my life was the only one in danger, and if that was somehow going to make it better. I was strangely calm throughout, telling my sister not to worry, and it was insane. There was a brief moment where she managed to get free and started wildly stabbing the bed where my legs had been minutes prior. At this point, my hand reached out, almost instinctively, to grab the knife, and I got the blade. She took the opportunity to squeeze, and I mean squeeze my hand over the blade, with a ninja grip, and I couldn't let go. Eventually, I managed to get free, and I remember that my sister was screaming at me to run over, and over. I guess they had controlled her in that moment. I ran through the house bleeding everywhere and made it to my brother's room, where the gravity of the situation hits me like a ton of bricks, and I start screaming at the top of my lungs. I compose myself enough to dial 911, where I start screaming at the dispatcher that I'm going to be murdered over and over. The next thing I know, there is a banging in the bedroom door. My sister later told me that she had taken the knife and thrown it behind the bed. Sandra was downstairs and found another one and hid it in her pants under her shirt. She comes back and her voice has changed, and I hear her say, "Hey Amy, come out, I want to talk to you." My sister's telling me that she's not going to hurt me, and my sister at this point sees the hidden knife. Sandra then starts screaming that she knows where I work, that she knows where I go to school, and that if I don't come out, she's going to find me one of these days and finish off what she started. Then the loud banging on the door ensues. I take this as my cue to create a bit more space and run into the bathroom, and in the bathroom, I lock the door. My sister's friend, who was in the room the whole time, comes into the bathroom with me. I have no recollection of this, but apparently I tried to stick my hand in the toilet to clean off the blood completely out of my mind. I was still on the phone with 911 when I hear, "Police!" The police took her and knocked on the door, and I let them in and fell into a heap on the floor and was absolutely hysterical. Throughout the whole ordeal, the one thing that stuck out with me was the fact that I was sleeping. There's something about being awoken like that scars you, especially when it's an unprovoked attack. To this day, I have a near impossible time sleeping alone in the house, and I always have a knife beside my bed. It's not much out of fear that she'll return, as it is that I came to the realization that anything is possible. If you look at someone the wrong way or upset them without realizing, what's to say they won't find out where you live and try and stab you to death in your sleep? I am absolutely certain my sister saved my life, and I'm glad I told her to come home that night. If I'd been sleeping alone, I may not have been able to share this story. I definitely learned to lock the door, and that people were capable of crazy things. Everything was really poorly handled, in my opinion, by the police. They released her the next day, and I wasn't informed. The police didn't even charge her with assault. The Crown, however, did eventually. I was contacted wanting to confirm that I wanted to drop the charges because her lawyer claimed that's what I wanted. In the end, they charged her with assault and possession of a weapon. No jail time, because it was a first offense. I was seriously pissed.
I'm not sure if I'm being stalked or somebody's just trying to scare me. I don't know if I've ever met this person in question, but for a bit of context, I'm a 22-year-old queer dude with a cocktail of mental illnesses and drug problems. The main illness that affects me on a daily basis is BPD, borderline personality disorder, which comes with, in my case, pretty intense paranoia, low self-esteem, and a confusing mix of wanting affection constantly, but also not trusting anybody. I've used Grindr and other dating and hooking up apps since I was 18, and have admittedly had a lot of sexual encounters and casual relationships, many of whose names I probably couldn't even remember. So to my encounter, this all started in late November, early December of last year, and has been a constant feature in my day-to-day life since. I received a message on Grindr from a blank profile. No pic, no info, nothing. The message simply read, "I know who you are," followed by a picture of my face. I believe it was a picture from my old Facebook account. Bearing in mind, my profile didn't have a face pic, as I like to stay under the radar on those kinds of apps due to family and friends. I had no idea how to respond, so I didn't. A day passed and nothing more had happened, so I shrugged it off as somebody just messing around. But then later that day, I received another message. "Why are you ignoring me?" This time I responded because I was admittedly a bit on guard and started to panic. I said something along the lines of, "Yeah, whatever, you know who I am, so?" At this point, I just blocked them, half because it was just a bit weird, and half because I was scared of what they would say back. Nothing else occurred over the next few days, and I was relieved because I had been pretty shaken by the whole thing. It may seem like nothing to some people, but it really did affect me. My paranoia and general distrust of everybody obviously played into this. I was at a friend's house when I received my next creepy message. This time, a text message from a contactless number. "Hey you, why did you block me?" At this point, the slight feeling of unease escalated into genuine concern and obsessive thoughts about who this could be, why they were messaging me like this, and how they, A, knew who I was from my Grindr profile, and B, how they got my number. I didn't tell my friend about this. I just put my phone away and carried on like nothing was wrong. But I think he knew something was wrong, because he kept asking if I was okay, or I needed a glass of water because I was pale and clammy and had gotten really quiet. In the following weeks, I received more messages off different Grindr accounts, presumably the same person. Messages along the same lines of, "I know who you are, don't ignore me, I'll keep coming back." It was coming up to Christmas, and I just couldn't be doing with it anymore, so I deleted my Grindr account. I made a new Snapchat and I changed my number. I was meant to be enjoying time with the family, not being scared and suspicious of everybody in my life. Over Christmas Eve and up to towards the new year, nothing happened. I assumed they got bored. But then in early January, it started up again, with the same old routine. Text messages this time, which scared me because I had changed my number, and I think the number that I was receiving them from was different from the first time around. This time, they were much more threatening, not in a violent way, but by the fact that they seemed to know my movements and my whereabouts. I'd go shopping and I'd get home and check my phone and see a text that would read, "I saw you shopping at Hartley Shopping Center today. I like your jeans." The frequency seems to have simmered down slightly, however, and I'll now receive a text maybe 2 or 3 times a week instead of nearly every day. But they just seem so threatening, as if they're trying to let me know that they can get to me wherever and whenever they want, whoever they are. So this is pretty much where I am now, still receiving those weird threatening texts, sometimes from several different numbers. I've run the numbers through Facebook and found nothing. I've Googled the numbers and again found nothing. I'm thinking they may be using a random number generator. I have no idea who this could be. Is it someone I've hooked up with, who has been fixated? Or a friend trying to mess with me? Somebody I've never met who knows who I am for whatever reason? I don't know if I will ever know. My 3 best friends, Cam, Alex, and Jake, and I were bored on a Saturday, so we decided to go to the park a few blocks from Alex's home and play some basketball. We were there maybe half an hour when Cam pointed out a man who was staring into the palmetto shrubs behind us, and he was not moving. Alex told us to just ignore him, so we kept playing. We didn't think much of him. A little later, the sun is starting to set. We are done playing basketball, and we are just hanging out when Alex points out that the guy that we had spotted earlier is near the playground and was talking to a woman who looked scared out of her mind. We couldn't hear anything he said, but she looked panicked. The woman motioned for her little kids to get down from the slides, and when they do, the man started screaming at the top of his lungs and trying to grab them. He grabbed the girl's hair and pulled her away from her mom. By this point, all of us stood up and were getting ready to go over there. I'm pretty weak, but Cam and Alex are big guys, and Jake was on the high school football team. The guy let go of the girl's hair, and the mom started to run towards the parking lot. A car had just pulled up, which I learned later was her brother who had arrived to pick them up, and she was running towards the car with her kids in her arms. Jake, Alex, and Cam looked at me, and we must have decided in that moment to help, even though none of us said a word to each other. The mom had just gotten to the vehicle and was trying to get the car door open and get her kids inside, but the man kept slamming it shut. Cam and Alex got in between the man and the mom so she could get the kids in the car. This guy starts howling like a wild animal. He tried to get around Cam, and when he realizes he couldn't just reach through them, he goes to the other side, where Jake and I were. He can't get past us either, but he was swearing and spitting and trying to push us aside. Right when the mom got into the passenger seat, he ran to the other side of the car and reached through the open window to grab the little boy. Alex punched him hard right in the ribs, and he didn't even flinch. He kept trying to get to the kids, but thankfully the car pulled away. We start to walk away, but the guy is screaming at us that we're selling drugs, and we're all on drugs. Cam tried to tell him that we weren't, and that we were just kids, but he runs right at Alex and shoves him to the ground. Jake was basically on top of him so fast it was all a blur. Basically, Jake and Cam pulled him off of Alex and pushed him away, but he charged at us again. Alex and Jake got a few hits in. I kicked him in the stomach, and basically we beat the ever-living shit out of this guy. The police were called, and they got the guy. I believe he is still in jail, or a mental institution. This happened a few years ago to me, when I was still living in my childhood home down in California. I had just inherited my family home, so my cousin decided to move in with my husband and I, while she was attending a nearby college. My cousin and I were both working at the Lego store at the time, but I only worked mornings, and my husband and cousin worked nights, so there were many nights where I was alone. A couple of weeks before this happened, I had been taking stuff out to my car when I realized a strange, brown van with no back windows parked across the street. As I put the stuff in the trunk, the man in the van started making weird noises at me. I turned to see if I could get a look at his face, but his black Giants baseball cap was pulled down really far. Thinking he was just a creepy guy, I flipped him off and went back into the house. About 2 hours later, I went outside to go somewhere, and he was still parked across the street. Not thinking anything of it, I hopped in my car and headed to my friend's house. As I was driving, I looked in my rearview mirror and saw the same brown van following me. I turned on a whole bunch of streets, and he followed me down all of them. I turned onto the road that my father-in-law lived on and parked, thinking if the guy tried anything, I could just run there and be safe. When I pulled over in front of my father-in-law's house, the van slowly drove by. I looked into the van, and the man put his hand into the gun position and pointed it at me and said, "Bang!" really loudly. After that, he drove off really fast. Now I have always been a little leery of staying home alone. My house had always given me the creeps because of how poorly lit it was. When I was alone at night, I usually just stayed in the kitchen because of how bright it was. I was watching a TV show on my computer when all of a sudden, I hear a banging on the front door and the handle jiggling. It startled me for a moment until I looked up at the time and saw it was around 10 p.m. and knew my cousin was going to be coming home from work about that time. I got up and opened the door, but nobody was on the porch. I shouted my cousin's name, but still no response. I called my cousin's cell phone, and immediately she was like, "Oh hey, I'm on my way home from work right now." Before I could say anything else, there were 3 extremely loud bangs on the door that connected the kitchen and the garage, and the knob was shaken violently. I slammed the front door closed, locked it, and chained it, and ran for my room. My aunt called me while my cousin called the police, and I stayed under a blanket until my cousin arrived. When she came and got me, I was led outside to talk to the police. I was trying to explain what had happened, but the officers along the side of my house were distracting me. I walked over to where they were, but one of the police officers held me back. They opened the gate and saw that the door to my garage, which we always leave locked, was wide open. All of the officers in that area pulled out their guns and went into the garage, but nobody was in there. Afterwards, the police told me it was probably just some kids messing around, but if I ever get scared at home, just to call them, and they'll send somebody out. About a week later, I was watching something in my living room with my cousin and my husband. As I was passing by the window next to the front door, I realized there was a guy wearing the same baseball cap as the guy in the van, standing outside on the sidewalk, staring at the house. When he noticed me watching, he immediately locked eyes with me and slowly gave me the creepiest smile I had ever seen. I turned and yelled for my husband to go out there, but when I turned around, he was gone. I will say, though, that the baseball cap in question is really generic, and a lot of Giants fans wear it, so I can't say it was the same exact guy, but I felt like it was. 3 days after that, I was home alone at night again. I was on edge, but I was trying to ignore it, telling myself that I was going to be okay. I was baking cookies in the kitchen when I thought I heard a knock at my sliding glass door. My whole body tensed up, and I slowly turned towards the door. The lights in the backyard were off, and the kitchen ones were on, so the glare on the window made it impossible to see if someone was outside. Everything was silent for a few seconds before someone banged on the door again. I screamed, but felt paralyzed in fear. The person ran onto the deck from the sliding glass door to the 2 windows in the living room and started knocking on them as well. They came back to the sliding glass door to knock and started trying to open the door. I finally came to my senses, grabbed my keys, and ran outside into my car. I locked myself in my car and dialed 911. We sold our house shortly after that. I still have a hard time staying home alone, even though I'm 2 states away now.
I am a 28-year-old female from Germany. Northern Germany is a safe place to raise your kids. Murderers, kidnappings, shootings, etc. are not common here, not even in the cities. I'm not a girly type. Actually, I don't seem very feminine at all. With short hair, wearing a hoodie, shorts and piercings, and no makeup. It's just not my thing, and I consider myself rather tough. I know I have strong fists, despite my MS. Normally, I avoid stress and hate getting into fights. My friends call me a goofy, gentle softie. It does take some serious stuff to rile me up, but there's one thing that changes me from a doe to a female grizzly with cubs. When I think about what happened several weeks ago, my whole body shakes. I made a new friend on Saturday, Andrew. Andrew is 10 years old and quite a nice boy, so a little bit younger, well, a lot younger than I am. I came to know him whilst playing the new Pokemon Go game. We had a lot of fun, and my battery went low after 2 hours, so we parted ways. I went on catching tours every day since I downloaded the app. Before that, I rarely left the house. Back then, I didn't know why, but I had to think of my meeting with Andrew. I guessed I was just curious when I would see him again on our tours. So this one Friday, I decided to do a second run through my neighborhood. It was around 6 p.m. or so. I told myself I was just getting some Pokestops and would go home, and left the house. As I turned the corner, not 500 meters away from the place where Andrew and I first met, I saw him. I smiled to myself and went down the same route as he, to surprise him or something to the effect. After some steps, I saw a hooded guy peeking out of a side street behind the kid a few times. I kept going and watching. My smile turned upside down when I realized that he was watching the child. My inner alarm went off, and the guy started to follow Andrew in a careful but steady pace. Stopped wherever the kid stopped. A part of me still couldn't believe that this could get serious. I mean, we're in Germany after all. So I followed at first, and Andrew didn't seem to notice this guy, and both didn't seem to notice me either. At this point, the man quickened his pace to catch up with Andrew. He grabbed him by the arm and put his hand over his mouth to shut down the screams. He was dragging him towards the bushes, and I froze, my heart dropping. I ran like hell to them, dropped my phone on the concrete, and started to roar, swearing as loud as I could. The guy turned around startled. I don't know how my body managed it, but as soon as I got close enough, I literally lost it. I tore Andrew away, too harshly, sorry buddy. He fell to the ground, and I hurled myself at this creature. He was bigger than I, and in his mid-30s, and I've never had such a surge of adrenaline in my entire life. I was scary as hell, but my fury was worse. I screamed to call the police several times, hoping that someone would hear me. He seemed like he had seen a gym once in a while, but I didn't care. I somehow got him off his feet by pushing him and punching his nose until it got blood everywhere. I have no idea how I did that. Maybe he just didn't expect a smaller woman to be able to achieve that. I kicked the shit out of him whilst he was down, screaming until my strength left. When he got back to his feet, he glared at me, growling at me, calling me a stupid bitch, telling me that I regret it, and drew some kind of hunting knife, a large one at that. I knew he'd come right for me, and I thought he'd stab me. In my mind, I knew I was going to die right there and then. But I didn't move. I just kept staring at him and kept on screaming at him. And suddenly he bolted when some residents came out of their houses. I dropped to the ground. I wanted to chase after him, but because of my MS, I couldn't do anything. I just sat there shaking and started to cry. I looked around to see if I could spot Andrew. He had gotten away and watched from a safe distance, clearly as shocked as I was. When the police came, we told them what happened. I gave Andrew my contact so we could keep in touch, and the police drove Andrew home, and he insisted to let me come. The whole way he didn't let go of me and cried so hard I could hardly fight my own tears back. His parents thanked me 1,000 times for saving their child. The police called me the next day to invite me to do a full report, and they informed me that this bastard is wanted for several sexual assaults on young women and children. He is still on the run. You know, I was really grateful for this app's existence. I don't even want to imagine what would have happened if I didn't decide to go out that time of day. My phone unfortunately didn't survive the fall, but I'm so glad Andrew is still healthy and safe and with his family. I'd break 1,000 smartphones to defend a child from danger. To all the paedophiles out there, pray we never meet again, because I'll rip your dicks off with a rusty wire and feed it to the street rats.
This story happened to me about 7 years ago when I had just started high school. The school I was at was about a 10-minute walk from my little brother's school, so every day I would walk up there to meet him. It was a pretty safe walk along the main roads with lots of sunlight and cars, but not many people most of the time. Occasionally, you would get some other school children, or some runners, or some older people walking to their apartments, and of course, the people waiting at the bus stop. The bus stop was halfway between my school and my brother's, and there were only ever about 2 people waiting there. One afternoon, I was walking up to meet my brother, and I had left my headphones at home that day, so I couldn't listen to music while I was walking, which is normally what I do every day. So I was just walking and enjoying the sun and the pretty plants in the garden. When I reached the bus stop, I noticed an old man sitting on the bench waiting for a bus. I passed him and didn't think much of it because he seemed harmless. I'd say this guy was about 60 to 65 years old, pretty short and not very fit. As soon as I walked past him, I heard him get up. I didn't see a bus coming. Maybe he was checking the timetable, but no, of course not. I turned my head to check, and this guy is like 5 steps behind me with his eyes stuck on me. I started to speed walk, but then I heard him speed up too. I look behind me, and sure enough, he's speed walking as well. I was scared. He hadn't taken his eyes off of me, and now, whenever I looked back, he was giving me this creepy, devilish grin. There was nobody else around, and I was about 200 meters from my brother's school. I decided to run. I looked behind me, and the old guy was running too. I couldn't believe it. He was faster than I thought he would be. Every time I looked back, he was staring at me and smiling. I was almost in tears. I was so scared I wasn't going to make it. Now I know that you might think that a teenage girl could outrun a man in his 60s, but with a school bag weighing around 20 kilograms and a messed up knee from gymnastics, I was about as equipped to run as he was. By this point, I could see my brother's school, and some kids were leaving. I was kind of relieved, and I thought the old man would ease up and notice that other people were around. But no, he starts yelling to the people saying, "My granddaughter, she's running away from me. Get her, she's in trouble." All the while giving me this evil grin. I then stop, because I've come to a massive road and don't want to get hit by a car. The guy gets close enough to grab my bag and tell me to stop being such a little cunt, and that he was going to win and take me away. I screamed and ran for my life, not caring about the cars. I got into my brother's school and looked back to see the guy jogging towards me. I ran into the main building and told the receptionist what had happened. She had a look outside and pointed to a man waiting outside the school gate, moving his head around as if he was trying to spot someone. It was him, and she told me to wait with her while she called the police. The man walked away after about 10 minutes, but the police did not catch him, and we found out that he had been offering candy to kids from my brother's school and trying to get them to come home with him in the afternoons. I walked on the other side of the road from then on, avoiding the bus stop and anyone I passed. When I was 18, I got a job at Walmart. Small town, not much else there for someone fresh out of high school. I'd been there about a month and worked in the jewelry department, usually from mid-afternoon until the department closed at 9 p.m., and I would close the department by myself. Walmart is open 24 hours, so other people were always around. One night, I'm locking up the cases and putting things away, and an overnight stalker walks by and says hi. I look up, smile and say hi back, then go about my business. The only way I can describe him is to say he looks like one of the Bee Gees. Shoulder-length frizzy hair, kind of a bouncy hop to his step whenever he walked, mid-50s. This started to become a regular thing. On nights that I closed by myself, he'd walk by and say hi, and I would say hi back. That's it. No conversations ever took place. Then, on my birthday, A few of my friends who worked there got me a cake, and I hugged them and said thank you. About an hour later, Mr. Bee Gees comes around with a birthday card and gave it to my manager to give to me. Manager thought it was extremely funny that this weirdo got me a card until I opened it. It read, "Happy birthday. I saw you hugging those guys earlier. It made me really mad, but I called a friend and talked it out. And he made me realize you're allowed to have friends other than me. Just please don't hug them anymore. Save those hugs for me." I don't know what kind of emotion showed on my face, but my manager grabbed the card and read it, then walked me back to the store's manager office and showed it to him. Store manager said the guy was obviously joking, but that he would talk to him about it. I didn't see Mr. Bee Gees for around a week, until one night when I was closing. He plunked down a stuffed envelope on my counter as he walked by without a word. Inside were 6 pages front and back of pure crazy. It was basically his entire life story, all about his families and schools he went to, but with weird stuff like how his sister was psychic and his father was an exorcist. The end of the letter was about how his friend, who was 18 months old, was missing, and he knew she was being raped because he could hear her screaming his name in his dreams. So that also went to the store manager, and he had me write down a written complaint, and he told me not to go outside by myself and not to wander near where the guy might be on my breaks. 2 nights later, I was finishing up for the night, and the way the counter is set up, there was one opening and the counters go all the way around both sides. He brought a hand cart around with boxes for my department, but pushed it into the only opening into the counters so that I was trapped inside. He just stood there and stared at me while I looked at him. I was then, and I still am now, riddled with anxiety. I don't like confrontation, and the last thing I wanted was for this weirdo to confront me about reporting him twice. He whispers, "Sorry, didn't mean to scare ya." I turned around and started finishing my closing tasks, pretending he wasn't there, even though I could feel him watching me. After a few minutes, I just looked at him and said, "Weren't you told to stay away from me?" He gave me this gross predator grin and said that the store manager asked if he was joking, and I told him I was. Then he leaned in as close to me as he could, with the counter between us, and whispered, "But I'm not joking." Then he walked away. For 2 weeks after that, he would randomly show up wherever I was. I would leave for lunch. He would be there. Even non-working places. I would go to the mall, and he would be there too. Another department manager told me he had been reported by 4 other people over the last 2 years for similar behavior. I again went to my store manager, who told me the guy was harmless and maybe had a little bit of a crush. He was in his 50s, and I was 18 or 19 during all of this. A week later, I gave my notice, and I quit my job. But Mr. Bee Gees still works there, 13 years later, and he still gives me the heebie-jeebies. It was the middle of summer, and my parents had left for the weekend to go to our house in Cape Cod. It's about a 2-hour drive away, so it's no big deal for them to leave me alone for a few days. My mom had made me some pasta for me to heat up to eat whenever, and I had some money if I wanted to order a pizza. Things were all good. The first night I was alone, I stayed up till 3 in the morning playing Xbox, so I woke up really late the next day. I checked my phone when I woke up and saw it was a little past 1. I had made plans to play some street hockey with my friends at 3, so I threw myself out of bed and stumbled into the shower. I take really long showers, so when my parents are gone, I go mental. I was in there for about 45 minutes on my phone, scrolling through Reddit and Twitter, when I heard my front door open. The bathroom is directly up the stairs from the back door, and the thing is pretty loud when it opens and closes. I immediately froze, since obviously I was supposed to be alone. I waited for about 2 minutes, listened to try and hear anything else. but nothing. I figured it was just the wind, or maybe my parents were home early, so I turned off the shower, wrapped my towel around myself, and slowly walked down the stairs to check it out. The stairs to the kitchen, where the back door is, are pretty tight and walled in, so I can't see into the kitchen when I walk down. Even though my house is old and each step on the stairs makes a super loud creak, I still took my time and tried to be as quiet as possible. I probably took 45 seconds walking down all 12 of the stairs. So when I got to the second to last stair, right before I could see around the corner and into the kitchen, I took a little breath to compose myself. In my mind, I knew I was being stupid. There obviously wasn't anything in the kitchen. There's no way I wouldn't have heard another noise. And there's no reason for them to be in the kitchen, even if there were burglars or something in my house. After sort of mentally chastising myself for being such a wuss, I sort of chuckled to myself for being so stupid and just normally walked the last 2 stairs and turned the corner into the kitchen. Standing about 2 feet away from me in the middle of my kitchen is a man staring straight at me, perfectly still, with a massive smile across his face, just staring at me. The thing I remember most vividly wasn't his face or his smile, but his arms. They weren't just at his side. He held them in the strangest, most abnormal position I've ever seen. They were where one would normally hold their arms, but he had rotated them to the point where they were almost completely reversed, as well as lifting them up and a little behind himself. I don't know why I remember this so much, but it's just the most demonic, abnormal position I've ever seen. Honest to God, I think I almost had a heart attack right there. Looking back, I can realize how fucking creepy this situation was, but in the moment, I just took a step towards him and punched him as hard as I could right in the jaw, sort of half slapping, half pushing him towards the ground. The second I connected, I beelined up the stairs, dropped my towel in the kitchen with my heart beating out of control. I fucking sprinted into my room and locked the door behind me. I quickly put a chair up against the doorknob like you see in TV. Almost without thinking, I immediately dialed 911 and nearly, in tears, told the operator what happened. As I sat on the floor of my room, in practically the fetal position, staring at the door praying that a cop would be here soon, I noticed the light coming from the gap between my door had stopped. The man was standing outside of my door. There's no words to describe the feeling I had. I was paralyzed with fear, watching the shadow across the bottom of the door shift in tiny ways. I stayed balled up, staring at the gap, praying the man would go away for what seemed like an hour. All the while, the 911 operator was asking, "Hello, sir? Sir, are you there? Hello?" I didn't want to make a noise, and even if I wanted to move my arms to bring the phone to my mouth, I don't think I could have. Eventually, the light returned to the gap, and I heard the faintest of footsteps, slowly creaking the wooden floorboards as he walked down the hall. It was silent for minutes as I just sat there, curled up, unable to even speak. I heard banging on the front door and the sound of 2 police officers entering my house. I finally felt safe, and I opened the door to the 2 of them standing there. I almost cried. Nowadays, my parents don't even leave me home alone anymore. Thank God.
This happened last year, and I'm thankful that it didn't end poorly. Back then, I was renting a workshop/office space for my small business making kids' clothes in the downtown area of my city. I hadn't bothered to put up signage outside at all, because the space was used as a workshop and storage for production. So very few customers would ever be coming by. I also didn't post the address of my business on my cards. This city is better known as the armpit of Ontario, the South Side houses, and a lot of crime and drug users. Naturally, some of these folks end up downtown during the day because there's a methadone clinic nearby, but I'd never had a problem. My space was at the back of the building, and the other offices were used by companies with little to no foot traffic outside of their regular staff. My staff came in on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, but I would go in by myself on the odd Tuesday if there were enough work to support it. When I was there alone, despite being a tiny woman, I never locked the main office door until after 5 p.m. because I felt safe. On this particular Tuesday, I'm working away in the middle of the day at the back office. I'm playing music because I'm solo and trying to remain motivated. Somehow over the music, I hear the hinges on my front door squeak, like someone has just come in. For reference, the main door to my space opens to a hallway. My office has 4 rooms, one large workshop to the left of the entrance, one smaller office directly across from the entrance, and 2 offices off to the right. The farthest one, to the right, is what I call the back room. Oh, and there's no bell or anything when the front door is opened. After hearing the squeaky hinges, I pop my head out of the back and see that no one's at the door in the hallway. I also didn't hear the door close at all or any footsteps, just the squeak. When I look out, the door is still closed and everything looks fine, but something in my gut is telling me to double check. So I start walking up the hallway towards the main room. As I get to the entrance, I casually turn my head to glance into the room directly across from the entrance. There's a woman standing there, in the dark, looking back at me, pupils like saucers. I'm startled as shit, but my brain hasn't caught up enough to make me get the hell out of my office, despite having a super creepy vibe. Instead, I quickly walk into the main room and loudly say, "Can I help you with something?" briefly turning back to the stranger. The woman follows me into the room and doesn't reply, which is creepy as shit. The workroom has a giant crafting table in the middle and box cutters we use regularly placed on the table. Because the box cutters are no more than a tool for me, I don't even remember nor notice they were there. Trying to put space between me and this person, I walk to the far side of the table, so it's kind of in between us. This woman still hasn't responded, and is now just staring blankly at me. I repeat myself louder and wait, and still I get no response. She then picks up a shopping bag from a rack by the door and starts moving towards a table that has orders waiting for pickup. At this point, she's creeping me out, so I say, "Look, it's time to leave. You're not welcome here, and there are no scheduled pickups for today." I wonder if I'm speaking a different language, because there is still no response. But by this point, I've got goosebumps by the creep factor. She takes a few steps towards me and starts looking around the room. I instinctively back up, She still hasn't said a word. After a minute, her eyes fix on the box cutters on the table, and I'm instantly filled with dread. She's now closer to the table than I am, and quickly puts her hand on the closest knife. Then, staring me directly in the eyes, she says, "I am not leaving." At this point, my brain is in full panic. I realize I am either about to get stabbed, robbed, or both. But by now she's blocking my path towards the only exit. A million things are going through my mind. Somehow, I make the snap decision to run past her towards the door, and I go screaming down the hall for help. Almost instantly, 10 guys come barreling out of the neighbouring office. Luckily for me, there was a staff meeting that day. I quickly explain what's happening, and they all go into my office where this chick is now stuffing items in her oversized purse. We all go back in, and I see both box cutters are now back on the table. I tell her to leave, and she doesn't respond. Finally, one of the guys takes a few steps towards her, and she points at me and says, "She told me I could look around." The guy says back, "Yeah, and donkeys fly. Put back whatever you just stuffed in your purse and leave." She doesn't budge, and a dude finally loses his patience. He grabs her arm and starts forcing her to the door. She finally leaves, and I call the cops. The best part, the cops don't even come to take a report. They tell me on the phone that because she didn't say that she would stab me or verbally threaten me, there's nothing much to report unless I can tell them exactly what she looks like. I call back later after a quick inventory check, and no one from LE follows up until a week later. There's a video of her in the main lobby for the offices, so I offer that to them. I also give them a description and repeat what happened. Turns out they know exactly who she is. She's a known drug addict and prostitute who has a long rap sheet and is prone to violence. How she found her way into my workshop, or why, I will never know. But to this day, it still gives me the creeps.
In 2014, I was driving at night on Highway 81 in southwest Oklahoma. It was around 2 a.m., and I hadn't seen another car for at least 30 minutes. I was on a stretch of road between Chickasha and Rush Springs. In other words, I was in the middle of nowhere. I come over a small rise and see a car upside down in a ditch and a body laying just out of the car. Kind of looked like he was sleeping on his side. I slam on the brakes and get out of the car and run over to the guy. I touch his shoulder, and he kind of slumped over onto his back. It was then I could see his head was smashed flat on the left side, and his abdomen was open. I could smell whiskey coming out of his gut. It was horrifying. This man had no pulse. So I get on my phone and I call 911. I give them an estimate of where I am. They tell me the nearest help is 25 minutes away, and I needed to wait with the wreck until they got there. I hang up the phone and look around. I'm alone in Oklahoma. The only companion I had was a dead man. Not knowing what to really do, I took his hand and said the Lord's Prayer, then covered his face with a shirt that was hanging out of the car. I was seriously shaking a bit. It was then I heard the coyotes start tuning up. If you haven't heard this sound, it's like the sound of small children being hurt badly. They wail and screech in what I think is a big circle around me and this man. It's been 15 minutes and no other cars have shown up. I hear them on the highway. They are crossing just out of the headlights of my car. Now I have a decision. Do I get in my car and let them come up and tear on this guy? Or do I find something to swing and protect his body? I got the tire iron out of my trunk and go back over to where he is laying. I guess I'm making a stand. I wait another 5 minutes. I hear them running around. It's really dark. I realize I'm not truly in control of this situation. Something very primal comes over my brain. It's like rage, along with a heavy dose of fear. Whatever was going to happen, I was going to fight like a crazed ape on the savannah. At this very moment, I see car lights. Finally, a car shows up, and wouldn't you know it, it's a Pontiac Grand Am full of methed up country boys. They pull over and look at me, then see the dead man, then the car. I say, "Guys, that guy is dead, and there are coyotes circling me." They go to their car and pull out several handguns and a couple of flashlights. They are wired for sound and excited as fuck to kill the shit out of these things. Although, they were almost as unnerving as the wild animals out in the dark. A couple of minutes pass, and we hear a siren off in the distance. The guys say, "It's the cops." They jump in their car and haul ass. I'm alone again, me and this poor man. 60 seconds later, a state trooper shows up, then 2 deputy sheriffs, and finally 3 city cops from some small town called Ninica, and finally an ambulance. They look the guy over and pronounce him dead. Then they ask me at least 100 questions, finally asking if they can search my car for drugs. They search and find nothing, then tell me, "Thanks for staying with the wreck, you can go." I left and started driving down this pitch dark road yet again. I feel like I've been in a battle for my life, and thinking our civilized behavior is little more than a thin veneer over a wild animal that wants to survive. A few years ago, I was hitchhiking to Vienna. With me was a friend. She was quite young at the time, in her teens. I was 22 or so. Anyway, we were kinda stuck on this gas station on the Austrian highway. A guy with long dreadlocks and punk attire, and a young girl who also looked like fresh out of the stoner punk catalog. Not the best combination if you are in need of a ride. Anyway, we see this bunch of shabby looking guys in their 3 cars, and I flat out ask them if they'll give us a ride. It was fucking cold, and we were kinda late, so you take what you can get. At least I thought so. At first, these guys were against taking us, but as soon as I started to speak in Serbian, the good old, "Are you go, brother? Come with us," bullshit kicked in, and they let us step into their car. After a few kilometers, the driver and his friend start to openly talk about which car we gonna get tonight, Toyota or Mercedes. I took a closer look at them, and it was those kind of guys who had women's names tattooed all over their arms and shit. Obviously, they drove to Vienna to steal cars. Well, I didn't think much about it, rather than laughing to myself in what absurd situations my life always leads me in. But suddenly, the younger guy turns to me and asks me, "Hey, how much do you want for her?" in Serbian. I'm like, "Dude, what?" And he explains to me in detail how he would fuck her all night and day, and offered me €300 if we drive to the next gas station now and I can have her. Of course I said there's no chance, but thinking that these guys are gangsters, I was terrified. But the guy kept insisting. Then, suddenly, my friend asks me aloud in German what the fuck we're talking about. "Come on, man, translate it for me. You know, I kinda like it when men talk Yugo. Makes me a bit horny." At this point, I prayed to all gods in the world that the 2 gangsters couldn't understand German. They couldn't, and the next thing I did is that I turned to my friend and told her that if she won't shut up, I'm gonna make her shut up. She, also, was terrified, and I felt so fucking sorry for her. The next hour or so, I made up all kinds of stories, from "she's my girlfriend" to actual marriage, cause the one guy didn't give up, of course. And then the driver said something like, "Give it up. You know these Austrian women aren't as passionate than our Balkan girls." And we drove in silence. As they kicked us out in Vienna, my friend of course immediately yelled at me, kicked me and whatnot. I told her that these guys just wanted to rape her, and it was the only way I could think about how to react. I thought that telling her what was going on during the drive would put us all in danger much more, cause having 2 terrified young people sitting next to 2 gangsters is worse than one person being terrified.
or so. I don't know. In the end, I apologized 1,000 times, explaining the whole situation, and she thanked me. Definitely one of the weirder stories of my life.
This story happened to me about 5 years ago. I went camping with 3 of my buddies, John, Bennett, and Kyle. We do this every year, kind of a bro trip to reconnect with each other. We were all fresh out of college and decided to go on our yearly camping trip in August. We are from Oregon and ended up camping in the woods there, like we usually do at the same spot. The first day was great. We set up our spot, explored the area, and by the time the sun was setting, we set up a campfire and made dinner. After a few too many beers and some s'mores, we decided to go to sleep. It was a perfect end to a perfect day. Our second day was basically the same thing. Hiking, food, one too many beers. But this night ended up being not so perfect. As we finished the rest of the beers, we were wrestling around with each other, like guys do. But then John stopped messing around and froze. Everybody was confused, but John claimed he heard something nearby. I told him it was most likely a squirrel, and he said, no, it was most definitely not. He was scaring me at this point, so I decided to resume the tackling session, and I took him down. We forgot about the whole thing until about 10 minutes later. We were tired from wrestling and joking around, so we decided to put out the fire and head into the tent. We had a 6-person tent, so we were all in one tent. Just as our only light source went out, I heard a slight crackle. I assumed it was one of the boys because we were all clearly a bit buzzed, so everything is funny. I wanted to see what was so funny, so I turned the flashlight on, directly onto Bennett's face. I thought he was the one laughing. Bennett's face was as white as a ghost. He looked at me and said, "Did you guys hear that?" I said, "The laughing?" And Kyle said, "That wasn't you?" We were all shaken and decided to go into the tent. As we got into the tent, I pulled out an axe that I used to cut the wood. It was the only source of protection that we had. I was on the very end of the tent, with Kyle and John in the middle and Bennett on the other end. We were all silent, but I knew we were all wide awake after hearing the laughing. We weren't exactly at an actual campsite where there were other people around. We just walked into the woods, found an open spot and set up camp there. We were about a mile from our car with barely any cell signal, so I guess you could say we weren't exactly in the safest position if there was a crazy maniac running around. I got tired, so I dozed off. I have no idea how long I was sleeping before I heard the laughing again. It's hard to describe other than it sounded menacing. I was frozen. I didn't move. I didn't even try to look over to see if my friends were awake. The axe was under my pillow. As I mustered up the strength to move to get the axe, I saw what looked like someone's finger pressed up against the tent, circling around the tent. Somebody was definitely outside, walking around our tent, laughing. When they got to the front part of the tent, where the entrance was, they stopped. About 5 seconds went by before the person ferociously shook the tent. That's when I knew my friends were awake, because Kyle screamed like a little girl, and after he screamed, whoever was behind the tent laughed again and ran away. We laid there the rest of the night, wide awake and sober. We didn't want to move out of pure fear that whoever was out there was still there. When the sun came up, we packed up everything and walked back to our car. We still go camping every year, but we make sure to go to a legit camping site. I also now bring a gun with me and not just an axe. Whoever was outside our campsite could have been a dangerous person. Maybe a psychopath, maybe a serial killer, but I sure as hell won't camp in a rural place anymore.
I work at a retail store, and I detest my job with all my heart. And because I was a dumb shit and said, "I'm always available," they routinely screw me over and put me at night. But I whine and bitch and moan, and I digress. It's okay working nights, since I get to see my boyfriend when he picks me up. Boyfriend usually gets off at 10:30, but he doesn't leave until 11, so most nights I'd have to wait for him. On top of all of that, he has to make a 10-minute drive, so I usually wait an hour and 40 to 45 minutes, which doesn't bother me. He'd call me to tell me he was coming, and make sure I was still alive. Earlier in the week, an Uber driver kept asking me if I was someone named Lenore. I told him no, and he did it again, but this time he kept asking if I was sure. How the hell am I not going to know my own name? Fortunately, my boyfriend pulled up and honked at me, causing the Uber creep to speed away. I'm a paranoid penny, so this made me wonder if he'd been watching me and knew my boyfriend always came late. And then I tweaked out, since I keep getting these weird phone calls from some telemarketing agency. But when I answer, no one's there and they hang up. Could it be connected? Is the government watching me? Do I have 7 days left? Fast forward 3 days later. I'm standing there listening to some music, waiting for him to call or pick me up. He finally does, and he starts cracking a joke about how glad he is the creepy Uber guy didn't answer. As we start shooting the shit and joking, this Indian woman comes up to me. I don't hear her at first, as I have noise-cancelling headphones. She gets closer and keeps calling to me. Finally she yells, "Hey!" I look over to her and smile, and then go back to talking to my boyfriend. She does it again, and again, and I excuse myself. "Hi, can I help you? Do you need a ride?" she asks. And she looks nice enough, but something just didn't settle with me. Her car is parked at the stop sign, and there is someone else in it. "No, my friend's coming for me, thank you." I notice there's a man in the driver's seat, and that she isn't wearing a uniform from either of the stores near us. She begins to ask again, "Are you sure? I can give you a ride. Do you need a ride? Get in. Do you need a ride?" I begin to feel a little uncomfortable, and my preschool "don't get into a stranger's car" training kicks in, so I politely decline and resume talking to my boyfriend. "So, are you close?" "Just pulled out. I'll get there. Just stay on the line." "Is the woman gone?" No, she wasn't gone. In fact, she was standing 6 feet away watching me, and she looked annoyed. I told him in code, "No, she is not left. She is in fact still there, leaning on the car just watching me. And she's looking angrier with each passing second." Out of the corner of my eye, I see the man tell her something, and she looks at me and begins interrogating me. "Friend not here. Do you need a ride? Where's your friend? He probably forgot you. That's okay, we'll give you a ride. It's called Get In. Tell us where you live. We'll drop you off. Do you need a ride?" At this point she begins to get closer to me. I try to avoid her by moving to the further end of the plaza strip. "Honey, yeah, so about my sister, well, she's gotten closer and I'm pretty scared she's too far away from home. Something might happen, hurry so I can tell you." I say it in code as the car drives up. Now she looks pissed. "Get in the car now. We give you a ride. Get in now." At this point she opens the car and begins trying to get me inside. Literally pulling me, yanking me on my jacket. She's taller and bigger than I, and she tries to pick me up. At this point, my bowels threaten to release and I'm screaming and kicking and wiggling. Meanwhile, I can hear him yelling at me that he's coming and that he's going to call the police. Now my mind is running 1,000 miles an hour, and I'm panicking, thinking I'm going to get raped or be some weird present for her husband, since she looks content with her efforts to kidnap me. Get in, shut up, I will not hit you, you need a ride, be quiet, you come with us, you want to see our house? Very nice, you need a ride. I start crying as she manages to get my torso in the car. My right hand is locked on my phone, and she begins trying to take it, and my boyfriend is panicking, telling me the police are sending an officer. She shoves my face into her leather seats. Now my airway is obstructed, and she's not letting go of me. She's bigger than me, stronger than me, and she knows it. Her whole weight is on me. I try not to panic, so I don't black out from the lack of oxygen. And all of a sudden, I start getting mad as shit. Her husband says something in Punjab, and she lifts one hand up and leans down trying to get something from the front. I immediately use the arms I'd been using to push myself off the seat and stab her in the stomach. She recoils, letting go of me a little, and I headbutt her, tossing my melon back as I scream. Fear-stricken and adrenaline-hazed. That's my purse. I don't know you. Finally, my boyfriend pulls in. I bolt to his car as the Indian woman is sitting on the ground. After I shut the door, he speeds off towards his house. When we get back inside, I break down, blabbering about how scared and terrified it was, and how, if I hadn't had the opportunity, she might have actually taken me to her house and done God knows what. After this incident, the police officer they dispatched got there 20 minutes after, and of course didn't find anyone. My boyfriend talked to his boss, and was granted the ability to leave early for me. I'm still weirded out by cars stalling in the plaza. I was also a little upset that my war cry was a line from the King of the Hill. So, Indian woman and man in a black Toyota, stay the hell away from me.
It all started over a year ago, living in my current small neighborhood. It was unusually hot in our house for October, and my sister figured it would be a good idea to keep her window open a bit for air. She was doing her homework and I was getting ready for bed, when suddenly she bursts into my room. She frantically says that she heard some noises outside, sounds of leaves crunching underneath a person's footsteps. I believed it to be an animal, so I walked into her room and stayed there for not more than 5 minutes until I also heard leaves crunching. We quickly glanced out the window, only to hear the sound of something running away in the woods. But that wouldn't be the end of the story. During the winter, I enjoy exploring the woods towards the back of my house, climbing trees and traveling further back into the fields. I remember the events very clearly. It had just snowed that night, the first snowfall of the winter, and I was more than excited to head outside. I did so and climbed my usual tree to look out. I gave a cursory glance around me and at the ground when I noticed something strange. Footsteps leading away from my house. This wouldn't have been weird, except the footsteps were pointing right at my house. October 2017, it started up again. I was laying in my bed, pitch dark, not a light shining through my room, when I heard it. My doorknob turning and my door creaking open. My heart stopped. Every single possibility of what it could be was rushing through my mind. Since I was covered by my blanket, I quickly shot my sister a text message. "Did you just come in my room?" She replied with a sharp, "No, I'm all the way in Hilliard." My heart began pumping fast. I slowly snuck my hand under my pillow and grabbed my baton. I sent a text to my dad and waited. My dad came in mere minutes later with a knife. He shot on the lights and I jumped out of bed. We searched the entire house with nothing. The alarm was set and all the doors were locked. That's impossible. There's no way that happened otherwise. You can believe that I didn't sleep a second that night. It's now December 2017. My relatives in town were staying here for a week in the basement. We turn on the alarm and all head to sleep. I stayed up playing games. In the morning, around 2:30 a.m., my uncle slowly opened his eyes with a feeling of being watched. His eyes adjusted a bit to the dark before he saw it. A guy, average height, scrawny, hair flowing in the wind, and shivering, looking inside their room through the window. My uncle screamed, and they grabbed the baby before taking off upstairs. That morning I was informed about what happened. I looked for footprints and saw only the smallest sign of one footprint. A front toe print made by what I could only assume was a sneaker. My uncle gave me more details without me telling him. I looked for footprints, and he said the guy was leaning to the left looking in. The footprint matched his story. The left had a thin line of dirt. Anyone could have shimmied across. Now that leads to tonight. The night I could swear he, or whatever it was, had been in my house. I couldn't sleep. Life has been stressful lately, and I was up pretty much all night until I tried getting rest. Every night, I usually have Christmas lights, dimly lighting the room, until tonight. I figured the lights must have been interfering with my sleep, so I unplugged them and headed off to sleep. Pillow over my head, I started to drift off, until it happened. A quick strum of my guitar, and the sound of something falling over with a desperate attempt to stop it from hitting the ground. This sound ignited my heart rate. Saliva developed at an extreme speed that made it hard not to swallow. I could feel the presence of somebody in my room. Realizing I left my baton on my desk, I did the next logical thing. I pretended I was asleep. I tried and laid there for what felt like hours, when in reality it was only minutes, until I heard a whimper come across from my sister's room. Imagining this may be the day everyone in my family was silently murdered but me, I gathered all the courage I had. I grabbed my phone, I turned on the flashlight, and grabbed my baton. I busted into my sister's room and screamed, "Hey!" only to see that they were unharmed. My sister asked what the hell I was doing, and I just stood there, looked into the pitch black of my room, and I cried. I have never in my life felt the overwhelming emotion of believing my family was going to be taken from me until today.
When I was in 6th grade, there was an older homeless man who tried to kidnap me for unknown reasons. For context, I'm a big guy. Even as a 6th grader, I've always been the tallest guy in my class, and I always looked older than I was, which is why I'm still not entirely sure what this guy's long-term plan was. We had a carpool system going between me and this other guy who lived near me. The general rule was, if the other guy isn't right at the car as soon as the bell rings, the one who was there can go grab something from the nearby corner store, and the guy who was late just had to wait it out. So I was first to the car. The other student wasn't in sight, so I told the driver, his dad, that I was running to the corner store. It was basically a straight shot from the school through a park about the size of one block and then into the store. So that's what I do, with no incidents to speak of. I remember I bought a pack of Skittles that morning. I start heading back through the park when a guy calls out to me. I turn, and sitting on a bench is this old, clearly homeless guy. He looks me over, and finally he goes, "You got candy?" I acknowledge that I do, in fact, have candy. He asks me if I like candy, which is a dumb fucking question to ask a kid with candy in his hand, but I just nod that yes, I do like candy. So then he gestures off to some side street and tells me that I have lots of candy at my place if you want some. I decline and start to walk. He calls out for me again, and I ignore it, and I return to the car. Now, I was a kid, but I wasn't an idiot. I was aware that this homeless guy just pulled the most stereotypical kidnapping attempt possible. So I feel it's prudent to tell our driver. He gets concerned, and tells me that I need to tell my parents when we get home. So we get home, and I tell my parents. They tell the school, and the next day they pull me into the office, where the principal and a police officer are standing. They take my statement, ask for a description of the guy, and tell me how I did the right thing. They sent out a general email to everybody, warning them about the creepy guy. But that was the end of it. No one ever saw or heard from him again.
This happened to me when I was 21 years old. There were a series of break-ins in my area that, this time, some of my neighbors had even been robbed at knife point. There were also a few rapes during those break-ins. At the time of the incident, no one had been caught for their crimes, so everyone was on high alert. I was actually scared to be alone in my house, because I had been attacked in other instances before and was still traumatized. Unfortunately, I was alone on this particular night, and something woke me up at around 1 AM. I laid in my bed, awake, alert, and listening. I didn't hear anything else, so I laughed at myself and assumed I must have been dreaming, and went downstairs to the kitchen to grab a cold drink. My kitchen windows have no blinds, and therefore anyone in my backyard can see in. I have a back door light that I always keep on at night. As I closed my refrigerator door, which is slightly reflective, I could see the reflection of a man peering into my house. He probably climbed over the back wall, and I could see him holding something shiny in his hand. I was really scared at this point, and wasn't sure what to do. Do I run into the living room and call the police? Do I start screaming? Do I try to run out of the front door? 100 different options flew through my mind in a second. Then I opened my refrigerator door again, put my cold drink back in, and proceeded to take out half a watermelon that was in there. I grabbed my knife from the drawer next to me and placed it in the watermelon on the kitchen counter. Then, with the most maniacal and sick grin that I could muster, I started stabbing the shit out of the watermelon. The watermelon juice got everywhere. I laughed hysterically as I stabbed and stabbed at it, mainly because I was really scared and truly hysterical at this point. With my clothes and hands dripping with watermelon juice, I turned slowly towards the window and raised my knife to above my shoulder. He was still there. I looked him in the eye and tried to smile, but it probably came out as a sneer. I opened my eyes wide, and then with a loud maniacal laugh started walking towards him, gripping my kitchen knife tightly in my hands. He ran, screaming like a crazed maniac into the night. His screams woke up the neighbors, who shouted for us to be quiet. I never called the police, mainly because I didn't know what to tell them. I didn't want to admit that I would have tried my best to stab that man had he not run away. I slept with my knife that night and cleaned up the watermelon mess in the morning. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I'd like to give a huge thank you to my good friend We Shouldn't Be Here for his help in this video. And if you thought that was it for tonight, oh dear listener, you are gravely mistaken. For we have even more horrors just waiting for your ears over on We Shouldn't Be Here's channel. Come on, follow me over to check out part 2 of this awesome collaboration and show some love to this amazing creator. Don't forget to let him know in the comments section on his channel that Mort sent you, and I'll see you there.